Resident Evil series. What can I say about it? It's a classic video game series and helped define the survival horror genre as we know it. It was inspired by an earlier Capcom game called Sweet Home, which is related to a film that takes place in a haunted mansion. It took the premise of being trapped in a mansion and crafted a beautiful story of corporate cover-ups, greed, and not to mention biological warfare. So let's sit back and go through the history of this beloved franchise that spawned games, toys, comics, and feature-length films. This is the Resident Evil Retrospective. The gameplay for the first few entries in the series is pretty much the same. Take control of one or two characters and maneuver them through their environment, whether that be a mansion, police station, catacombs, or a lab. You either pick a male or female. The male usually can take more blows from enemies, but his story is usually harder. The female characters tend to get the better weapons, so it's usually the one I play first. In the first game, you play as Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, two members of the Raccoon City Special Tactics and Rescue Squad, or STARS for short. They are dispatched with their squad to investigate the disappearance of their comrades in Bravo team, only to be attacked by a pack of strange dogs, which you later find out are called Cerberuses after the three-headed guardian of the underworld in Greek mythology. Chris and Jill make it to a nearby mansion with two other STARS members, Captain Albert Wesker and Barry Burton. From there you take control of the character you picked, and the differences between the stories begin, but those I am not going to spoil in case you haven't played the game yet. You investigate a dining room and come across a weird-looking human, which turns out to be a zombie. The mansion is crawling with them and your battle for survival begins. You make your way through the mansion, solving puzzles, reading papers, and blasting the crap out of whatever comes across your path. From normal zombies, to Cerberuses, to a giant snake, reptilian humanoids called hunters, insect things called chimeras, and the ultimate bioweapon, Tyrant. Of course, the biggest shocker of the game doesn't happen till towards the end, when you find out that the whole mansion is owned by a corporation called Umbrella, and all the creatures inside are the results of their experiments with something called the T-virus. And to top it all off, Wesker is on their payroll, and he's trying to cover it up by any means necessary. Talk about a revelation. To my knowledge, corporate greed had never been behind zombies before. Military greed maybe in that one movie, Return of the Living Dead 3, but that doesn't count as corporate. Whenever a company is the main villain, it's just bad, like Omni Consumer Products OCP in the RoboCop series. The way the Umbrella's actions are revealed makes you hate them, considering that their creations had been wreaking havoc on the outskirts of the city for months and they didn't send in a team to do anything about it. What happens over the course of the next few games makes you hate their guts even more. Now, when Resident Evil was first released in the US, small changes were made. Some shots of corpses were cut, as was a scene of Chris lighting up. Also, an auto-aiming feature was disabled and the number of ink ribbons was cut. Capcom almost was going to make it so that the chests that you find during the game didn't connect together, but they decided not to at the last minute, although there is an option in some versions of the game to where you can make it that way to make it more challenging, called Real Survivor. The biggest change, of course, was the title. In Japan, Resident Evil is known as Biohazard, with several issues in America, including the fact that Biohazard is copyrighted by a band of the same name, meant they had to change it. A contest within the company was held, and Resident Evil was the title picked. Although some people thought it was going to be cheesy, I think you can see that time has shown that to be the reverse. A year and a half after the game's release, a director's cut hit the market. It was originally made to compensate for a delay with the sequel's release, and it originally included a demo of the sequel. One of the One of the director's cut's main attractions is an arranged version of the game, where item placement is scattered, which makes the game a little bit more challenging for players like me who can memorize where everything is after playing through a few times. It also includes a beginner's mode with easier enemies and more ammo. One major addition to the story with the director's cut was that Forrest, a member of the Bravo team, becomes a zombie when you steal his weapon from him. This change was included in every other version of the game, as well as in the brief scene you see him in Umbrella Chronicles. The first game had so much popularity that it has been adapted into a novel, been ported to PC, Sega Saturn, Nintendo DS, and it was even remade in 2002 with better graphics, voice acting, and an expanded story that put a new character, Lisa Trevor, into play. The only major gripe fans have with the original version of the game is the voice acting. But being a fan of Japanese monster movies, I'm used to crappy dialogue and dubbing, but there's one line in the game that stands out to me.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Wow. That's all I can think to say about that. It's just so cheesy that it's funny. It's even referenced in a line in the remake at the same point.
Barry!
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Now, Resident Evil was so popular that it was only a matter of time until a sequel was released. Production began in '96, shortly after the release of the first game. However, as time went along, Capcom grew to dislike the game that they were making, and instead of releasing a game that they weren't happy with, they scrapped it and started from scratch. The first version of Resident Evil 2 has come to be known as Resident Evil 1.5. It included Leon Kennedy and Ada Wong and Sherry Birkin, as well as a Claire Redfield-like character named Elsa Walker. Several characters seen in the final game originally had bigger parts, like the Kendo gun store owner and Marvin the Black Cop from the police station. One difference you see right off the bat between Resident Evils 1 and 2 are the cutscenes. Where Resident Evil had live-action actors, Resident Evil 2 has CGI. This is one of the first games to my knowledge that did this, the other being Final Fantasy VII. Another difference is the stories. Both Leon and Claire have two scenarios, A and B. You have to beat Leon A to play Claire B, and Claire A to play Leon B. They're basically two halves of the same coin, showing you what the other character was doing when you first played the game. Enemies from the first game return, such as zombies, Cerberuses, and those damn crows that pop out of nowhere at you. We also see the introduction of a new one, the Licker, who in my opinion is one of the best enemy introduction scenes in game history. Now that is cool. The Tyrant also returns, but with a slight twist. You only face him in the B stories, and like the end of Part 1, he just won't stay dead. The cool part there is that after you shoot him down, you can pickpocket him for ammo, although it's mostly a good idea to run from him. The story picks up a few months after the end of the first game. Claire comes to Raccoon City to find her brother, and Leon is coming because it's his first day on the force. Both soon discover that the city is now overrun with zombies. They decide to go to the only safe place, the Raccoon City Police Department, but along the way they get separated. B mode has the luxury of starting not that far from the building, but in A mode you have to trek a few blocks around to get to the front. As you move through the station, you find out that after the first game, Umbrella continued research on another bioweapons project, the results being the new G virus. It was created by William Birkin, and when Umbrella went to retrieve a sample, he was mortally wounded, but saved himself by injecting a bit of the virus into his own body. Now a bioweapon, William killed most of the team Umbrella sent, also unleashing the T-virus in the case they stole. This really makes William a tragic figure, while at the same time making you hate his employers even more. Didn't the mansion incident teach them anything? Just like OCP and RoboCop 2, they try to sweep it under the rug and continue on without any repercussions. That's why I think corporate villains are one of the worst ones, in terms of evil, of course. Well, now for the supporting cast. Resident Evil has Wesker and Barry. The sequel has Ada Wong for Leon and Sherry Birkin for Claire. Ada is a woman dressed in red who's pretty good with a gun, who you later find out is a spy sent by an organization to retrieve a sample of the G virus. Leon falls in love with her, although he never does say it out loud, but he does kiss her at the end of his B story, and this only adds to his pain when he finds out the truth. You really feel for the guy, especially when you realize that this is why Ada told him to forget her when she was wounded at one point in the game. Sherry is Birkin's daughter and the first Resident Evil character to be annoying. She can get in the way sometimes when you're shooting at zombies in hallways, especially since they spit acid at her. Personally, I don't really have that big a problem with her. When the game was first released in America, not as many changes were made as were made on the original game. In fact, the death scenes in the US version are more graphic than in the Japanese release. And like the first game, another release followed not long afterwards, and this one allowed the use of the DualShock controller. It also included a new rookie mode that gave the player 3 infinite ammo guns. It was also ported to PC, Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, and a novelization followed. Overall, I have to say, this is a sequel that lives up to the original game, giving you everything you liked about Resident Evil and upping the ante. It was the first in the series I actually played myself, even though I did watch my older brother play the first game. And I connected on an emotional level with the characters, feeling their pain and their joy. It, along with DBZ, Pokemon, Digimon, Inuyasha, and Naruto, and books is what inspired me to become a writer. Like any good thing, Capcom couldn't stop with just one sequel. Resident Evil 3 was the second sequel in the series, and it was the last of the main series to be published on the PlayStation 1. Unlike the previous two games, you only get to play as one character, but the story changes based on the decisions you make and the order you make them in. Certain supporting characters might die differently, and others might not show up at all. In the game, you play as Jill Valentine, returning from Part 1. It starts you out a little bit before the events of Part 2, with the STARS unit discredited and all but Jill having left for Europe to dig up more dirt on Umbrella. When it seems things can't get any worse, the T-Virus breaks loose and the city is flooded with zombies and other bioweapons. Now you must try to escape the city alive with nothing but your survival skills and a few allies to help you. Your allies this time are 3 members of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service: Carlos, Mikhail, and Nikolai, as well as fellow STARS straggler Brad Vickers. Of the 3, Nikolai is the only one who doesn't trust Jill, and it turns out he's working with Umbrella to make sure Jill doesn't make it out of the city alive. Carlos turns out to be a decent guy, even though he does seem to be a whiner and a slight coward at times. There's even a part of the game when you play as him when Jill is infected. The previous two games had their tyrants. Resident Evil 3 has Nemesis, an experimental version of the T-103, aka Mr. X. He's programmed to seek and destroy all STARS members, and he starts with Brad. He then spends the remainder of the game hunting Jill down, and he sometimes pops up at the worst time. Now, the game ends with the US government blowing Raccoon City to hell with a nuke, but the series was far from over. The following year, we got Code Veronica. Now, I never played this game except for the first level, so there's not that much I can say about it, gameplay speaking. It continues Claire's search for Chris and reveals a little bit more about the inner workings of the Umbrella Corporation. You play as both Claire and Chris, Claire for the first part of the game, and Chris for the ending of the game. One of the bigger shockers of the game is that we find out Wesker is still alive, and not only that, but he's now superhuman. This, of course, comes into play in later installments of the series. Now, along with the 4 main games, Capcom made a series of side stories. The first was Resident Evil Survivor, which was unique at the time, for it was the only game in the series to be a first-person shooter. You shoot your way through the usual enemies while trying to find out who you are, as the protagonist has lost his memories before he crash-landed on Umbrella's private island, which is the main setting of the game. Like Code Veronica, I never played it, but I have seen some of the gameplay, mostly from YouTube videos and from my friend Joey. One scene I remember is when you fight one Mr. X above a room filled with row after row of them inside of tanks, showing that this is the island that they are manufactured on. Survivor had 2 sequels, but it wasn't the only spin-off. Capcom brought the series back to PlayStation with Resident Evil Outbreak. It was the first in the series to have online play, and it really brought out the survival aspect of the series. If you didn't beat the game by the time your meter reached 100%, you turned into a zombie and it was game over after a little bit of playing as one. Once again, I never played it. From what I've seen, it looks like it was a pretty good game, although compared to the main series, it kind of is a little underrated. And last but not least, Resident Evil even had a game on the Game Boy Color. It was called Resident Evil Gaiden. At first, it was canon, but recent games have shown this story to be not canon. In it, you played as Leon from Resident Evil 2, and you also ran into an old friend, Barry Burton. If I remember correctly, the point of the game was that you were stuck on a cruise ship filled with zombies, which part of this plot was later recycled into Resident Evil Dead Aim. But other than that, I don't know much about it.